Krishna Krishna, Hari Hari. Hari Rama, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari. Hari Rama, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama Hari Hari, Hari Krishna. Rama Rama, Hari Hari, Hari Rama. Rama 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 Hari Hari, Hari Krishna. Okay. So I'm going to start reading, and I make some comments, but it's more reading. Hare Krishna Pridniya. Jai. Oh, okay, that's the end of that. I mean, you're welcome to stay or to go, or who may come. Oh, I see. Sure. Well, I was watching with our app. You can see who's coming. Yes. Oops. Oh, my Lord. Well, there's no one coming at this stage. Okay. So here we go. Okay. So, devotees, here we are. We're going to read Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, continue, as we've been doing. We are in the third volume, chapter 24. And it's called New Jagannath Puri. Let's see. Okay. So yes, chapter 24, New Jagannath Puri. And we're still in San Francisco. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschityadesh. It was 7 a.m. Srila Prabhupada sat on his dais in the temple. Beside him on an altar stood the recently acquired statue of Krishna. The child Krishna stood 2 feet high, with his left hand on his hip, his right hand holding a rod. Guru Das had found him at an import store and had begged the manager to sell him. And after several visits, the man had agreed for $35. Prabhupada had given him the name Kartami Shai, which means the boss. This morning, as Prabhupada and Kartama Shai looked out at the devotees in the room, only about 6 people were present. The night before, the temple had been crowded. Where are the others? Prabhupada asked. And then he gave the answer himself. They're sleeping? All the sleeping is not good. He took out his kartals and began playing the 1, 2, 3 rhythm. Mukunda took up a mridanga and played along, trying to execute the rhythms Srila Prabhupada had recently taught him. Srila Prabhupada had not even begun singing when the door opened and 6 barefoot hippies wandered in, reeking of marijuana. They glanced around, then sat down on the floor with the devotees as Prabhupada began singing Gauravashtakam, the Vaishnav prayers to the spiritual master. Although none of his disciples knew the words, they loved to listen to Swamiji sing these morning prayers. Unhurriedly, he sang each verse, several times repeating each line, deliberately developing the mood of unadulterated service to the spiritual master. Then one of the hippies, a boy with long, straight, blonde hair and a red headband, began mumbling, fidgeting, and moaning. Someone softly asked him to be quiet. The boy paused, but then moaned again. Swamiji and his followers were used to drugged hippies who stayed up all night and came to the morning program, sometimes disrupting things. Usually the visitors remained submissive, and even if they occasionally called out in a strange mood, they usually found peace in chanting Hare Krishna and would try to blend with the energy of the devotees. But today's discordant visitor seemed agitated by the chanting, as if it were challenging him. Rather, he sounded like he was challenging it. You know, I don't know if you've been through that. Maybe you have. You know, this whole heavy drug taking, you know, particularly the hallucinogenics and marijuana, you know, that's somewhat different, but particularly like LSD and the related things, they, you know, they really disorient people extremely profoundly, particularly if the people sort of start becoming disturbed, they can literally go crazy. And this is what they were up against in San Francisco particularly. In New York, in the Lower East Side, it was similar, but on a much smaller scale. And usually the hippies were not as, sort of like totally lost as in San Francisco. Like in San Francisco, they oftentimes, even maybe the majority, but many of them, they were living in the streets. And they had just nothing. They had the clothes that they were wearing, but literally nothing else. And somehow they'd get drugs. But food or cleanliness, these things just were not, you could say, not available to them, in the sense that they just had no resources at all. As we were reading in the previous chapters about the development of things in New York, all the devotees, all the young hippies who became devotees, they all had flats in the vicinity. They all did. Some of them were working. So it wasn't like this scene of abject homelessness and just being like total unknowns on their own in a foreign environment. That's what it was in San Francisco, at least much more, really a lot more. And sometimes they would go, they become sort of psychotic, you could say, as they were going through their drug experiences. And of course, the sort of, you might say, funny thing, although it's not really, I mean, it's sort of funny in a sense, but ultimately it's not funny, it's just pathetic, is that there was a whole philosophy behind it. Different, you could say, beliefs that were, promulgated by a small group of, sort of intellectuals. Timothy Leary was a professor, if I remember correctly, in Harvard, which is, along with places like Oxford, Cambridge, and a couple of others in America, they're just the top in the world of places of learning. But he got into LSD there somehow. One fellow called, Richard Alpert, and a fellow called Owsley. Do you know the history at all of those things? Owsley, you must have heard of Timothy Leary. Alpert, Richard Alpert? No? Owsley was the one who started manufacturing LSD. Yeah. He sort of, I don't know, synthesized would probably be the wrong word, but he was a chemist, like a scientist. And so he figured it out and started manufacturing all these pills. And there were other forms also, but mainly pills. And Yeah, but there was a philosophy, and the philosophy was that materialistic life is just a total waste of time, which, in many ways we would agree with. But the alternative is to just drop out of it all, and which effectively meant for these young people in San Francisco just living in the streets. That's all. And getting something to eat somehow from somewhere. Many of them were coming to the temple. We read every day for lunch. They had between 100 and 200 people a day, and even more. So, but the whole thing was that through taking these drugs, you realize the hopelessness of material life, or it sort of encourages that sort of idea. But then you start getting the supposedly realizations, spiritual realizations about the essence of things and what is reality. I remember, when I was that age, there was one group called the Moody Blues. You heard of the Moody Blues? Yeah, and they were just at that stage just doing LSD music. Things like Through the Eyes of a Child, you can see. But it's not true. Children are just, undeveloped little persons. They may be cute some of the time, but they're not like advanced people. But they really would think like that. So, but, they would LSD and its relatives were drugs which don't affect the body so much, but they affect the mind. Others, like the narcotics, they affect both, but particularly affect the body. So, yeah, and if so the mind gets into different states, but sometimes they would become, very happy, but sometimes they'd become distressed. And when they'd become distressed, because they'd lost control of their mind, and the intelligence was not working clearly. So when things started going bad sometimes, they couldn't stop it. And they go into this sort of, hellish states. I knew this one boy, it happened to him, and he became, like clinically psychotic, and had to be put in a mental hospital. And, I don't know I left the country shortly after, so I don't know what happened to him after that, but he was not doing well at all. When he was not under the influence of anything, he was, disoriented heavily. So this young fellow here is in that type of condition. Today's discordant visitor seemed agitated by the chanting as if it were challenging him. Rather, it sounded like he was challenging it. The devotees began clapping in time with Prabhupada's cartels. And when Prabhupada began singing Hare Krishna, his half-dozen followers immediately joined him, chanting both lead and chorus. This is one of the things which is pointed out, that for quite some time, the devotees, kirtan was going on regularly every day in New York, and now we're in San Francisco. But everyone was singing at once. Yeah. So, okay. Prabhupada looked at them gravely, encouraging the bedraggled early morning band of youngsters, and they responded determinedly. The guests sat in drugged contemplation, although one or two tried singing along. But the blonde boy with the red headband remained adamantly disharmonious, moaning defiantly, as if trying to throw off the effects of the chanting. Nonetheless, despite the boy's moaning, which was sometimes loud and savage, Prabhupada kept singing, and the devotees kept chanting. Mukunda and Hayagriva exchanged anxious glances, but tolerated the boy, unsure what else to do. Some of the devotees were disturbed and even frightened, but they'd also heard Swamiji say in recent lectures that advanced devotees aren't shaken in any circumstances. Swamiji was their leader, not only in devotional prayers, but also in how to respond to this intruder. So they waited and watched him for a sign. Prabhupada remained undisturbed, but although after 20 minutes the kirtan was strong and determined, the blonde boy's madness was not going away. As the chanting built up momentum, he became more agitated. He screamed like a lost soul and hollered like a rock singer. He was becoming more and more troubled and angry. When the devotees rose to their feet and began dancing, the boy began dancing too, but in his own way, crying and pounding his chest. Mukunda played louder on the drum. The sounds were discordant, a clash of individual madness and group chanting, until Prabhupada finally brought the kirtan to a close. The devotees bowed their heads to the floor, and Srila Prabhupada intoned the Sanskrit prayers honoring the spiritual masters, the Supreme Lord, and the sacred places. All glories to the assembled devotees, he said. They responded, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhupada said. And then, as was his morning custom, he announced, chant one round. Everyone sat down, including the crazy hippie. The devotees put aside the drums and cartels and reached for their large red beads. Red beads, because there was no such thing as tulsi beads or any beads from India. What to speak of tulsi? And when I joined, which was already 73, and when I was first initiated, which was already, I think it was July 73, there were no beads from India. What to speak of nice tulsi beads, which are basically pretty common these days. So I also had sort of reddish brown beads, which I bought from the bead shop, which was just down the road on Oxford Street, the main street, but say a one round walk from the temple. And those were my beads, which I was initiated with. Okay, so the devotees reached for their large red beads and began chanting in unison. That's also a nice experience, chanting together in unison sometimes. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Fingering one bead at a time, they uttered the mantra, then proceeded to the next bead. Surprised at this turn of events, the blonde boy commented loudly, "Far out!" As rapid chanting filled the room, the boy jumped to his feet and shouted, "Come with me!" He whirled about, faced Srila Prabhupada, and howled, "I am God!" Then he began screaming long, loud, berserk cries. "Oh, wahoo! Wahoo! Ah! Oh!" He sobbed, growled, grumbled, stomped his feet like a small child. He explored every sound his voice could make. Beating his fists on his chest again and again, he cried, "I am God!" And one of the boy's friends suddenly played a few notes on a panpipe. I mean, little short, little pipey thing. But Srila Prabhupada kept chanting japa, and the devotees also tried to continue chanting undaunted, while at the same time keeping an eye on the madman and wondering where it would all end. Then, with a final violent ejaculation, the boy shrieked, "I am God!" and in anger and disgust strode out of the room, slamming the door behind him, yelling as he ran down the street. Shh. That's really extreme. You know, I joined in London, it was January 73. The hippie movement was still going on. It was definitely still going on. It wasn't at its peak like it was at that time, which was 67, but it was definitely going on. And we, in our temple in London, sometimes we'd get crazy people under the influence of usually LSD, and wow, some really weird people. One time there was this one girl, she's probably 20, something like that, and she was schizophrenic, real schizophrenic, split personality. She would start talking in different ways. Yeah. And she would sort of curl up on the floor. Bizarre. Bizarre. And on the streets, at least, I met a few hippies at different times, like, just bizarre people who told me, very strongly that they were God. Yeah. Okay, anyway, so the proper japa peacefully engulfed the storefront, and Srila Prabhupada's voice assumed its place more clearly above the voices of all the chanting devotees. After about 10 minutes of chanting, Prabhupada recited Sarvatma Snapanam Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam, which means, let there be all glory to the congregational chanting of Hare Krishna, which cleanses the dirt from the mirror of the mind and gives a taste of the nectar for which we're always hankering. As Prabhupada put on his spectacles and opened the Bhagavad Gita, he had been speaking each morning on the 6th chapter, the room settled and became silent for hearing his lecture. His students, some of whom had been imbibing his instructions for more than 2 months, they're the seniors, devotees, more than 2 months, listened attentively as he spoke the eternal parampara message. It was Krishna's timeless message, yet Swamiji was presenting it just for them as they sat on the rug early in the morning in the small storefront, 518 Frederick Street in Haight-Ashbury. Prabhupada lectured on the transmigration of the soul. Foolish people, he said, aspire for material acquisitions. They don't know that these things are finished with the death of the body. Spiritual life, however, is of the utmost importance because it is never lost. So even if Krishna consciousness becomes inconvenient or uncomfortable, one should never give it up. Srila Prabhupada was again stressing that the devotee is never disturbed, a point that seemed especially relevant in the wake of this morning's interruption. A devotee, Prabhupada explained, is always tolerant. Prabhupada told a story about the great devotee Haridas Thakur, a contemporary of Lord Chaitanya's, who endured severe beating at the hands of a Muslim magistrate. As Prabhupada told the story, he improvised dialogue. "Oh," the magistrate said to Haridas, "you were born in such a nice family, and you're chanting Hare Krishna?" Magistrate is obviously a Muslim. And then Prabhupada spoke for Haridas. "Sir, many Hindus also have become Mohammedan. So if some Mohammedan becomes Hindu, what is the harm?" Prabhupada didn't change the pitch or accent of his voice while taking different parts of the dialogue, but with a subtle storyteller's art, each voice became a distinct person. The magistrate spoke threateningly. "Oh, you are arguing?" Then Prabhupada became the narrator. So it was decided that Haridas was to be punished. Give the dog a bad name and hang it. Then Prabhupada became Haridas's floggers, who despite repeatedly beating Haridas, were unable to make him cry out in pain. Finally, exhausted, they spoke up. "Sir, the idea was that you would die, but now we see that you do not die. So now punishment is awaiting us." "Haridas, what do you want?" the floggers. We want that you should die. Narrator, and Prabhupada is all these parts. Narrator. Then he played himself into samadhi, and the floggers brought him to the magistrate. The magistrate, throw him in the water. Don't put him in the graveyard. He has become Hindu. See, the thing is that the Muslims, according to their idea, if your body is burnt, cremated, then there's no afterlife because you're finished. But if your body is buried, in other words, it's sort of, you could say, whole, then you can be reborn or, remanifested in heaven. So therefore, with the Hindus and with the devotees, it's interesting. At Radha Kund, there's one place, the place of the three samadhis, and is the samadhi of Raghunath Das Goswami, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. So as great devotees, because that's the practice, when they left their bodies were buried whole and preserved even, like buried in salt, because salt is a powerful preservative. So that was what was done with them, which is exactly what we did with Srila Prabhupada. I mean, I was not there, but that's what the devotees did, November 77. So the Muslims, when the Muslims took over, they would find where Hindus had been buried and would dig their bodies up or their remains up and smash them to pieces. Yeah, because then the idea is there'll be no afterlife for you because it's connected with the body. So with those three, Raghunath Das, Raghunath Bhatta, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the devotees, when they were buried, when they were buried, the Muslims were not so much in control, but then the Muslims really got into control, and it was probably someone like Aurangzeb, who was just most fantastically demoniac person. So they started a sort of, what would you say, a project of locating where people, Hindu people, were buried and digging up the bodies. So the devotees found out about that. So they dug up the bodies of those three great devotees and cremated them. So now their ashes are in those places. And actually the ashes of Raghunath Das and Raghunath Bhatta, the ashes of their bodies were divided in 2 parts each. Anyway, so yeah. So throw him in the water, don't put him in the graveyard. He's become a Hindu. Srila Prabhupada concluded his tale. The others were flogging him, and he was chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. He was undisturbed, he was steady. Therefore, Lord Krishna says that a person who's spiritually advanced, for him there's no misery, even in this world, and what to speak of the other world. A devotee suffers no loss, Prabhupada explained. Even if he doesn't become perfectly Krishna conscious, or even if he falls down, his next birth will be human. There was a prince. Prabhupada began a story to illustrate his point. His name was Satyavan. It's a famous story. But he was to die at a certain age, his horoscope said. But one girl named Savitri, she fell in love with that boy. Now she wanted to marry. Her father told her, he'll die at certain age, you don't marry. But she was bent on that. She married. In course of time, the boy died, say after 4 or 5 years, and the girl became widow. But she was so staunch lover that she won't let the dead body go away. And the Yamaraj, what is the English for one who takes away the body or the soul after death? So he came to take the soul away. So this chaste girl would not allow the husband's body to go away. By Prabhupada's voice and widening eyes, he appeared as Yamaraj, the Lord of Death, speaking to the widow Savitri. It is my duty that I should take. You give it up, otherwise you'll be punished. The girl gave up her husband, but followed behind Yamaraj. Then Prabhupada's Yamaraj, by a slight dropping of his voice, became compassionate. My dear girl, you go home. I give you benediction that you will have a son. Don't cry for your husband. But Savitri continued to follow Yamaraj. Yamaraj said, why are you following me? Then Prabhupada Savitri spoke out, not in a feminine voice, but with the reasoning and heart of Savitri. Now you are taking my husband. How can I have my son? Prabhupada spoke as narrator. Oh, then he was in dilemma. He returned her husband. So similarly, there's a technique. If you take to Krishna consciousness, then your husband, or this human form of life, is guaranteed. The devotees understood the gist of the story, but they weren't perfectly clear what their lives had to do with the woman in the story. Some, however, understood. If they took to Krishna consciousness, their ill-destined lives could become auspicious. Yes, Srila Prabhupada continued, a spiritual life is the most auspicious life. He looked around emphatically at the devotees seated before him on the floor. Anyone who has done something nice, auspicious thing, oh, it will never be vanquished. He will never be put into difficulty. It is such a nice thing. He ended his lecture and asked for questions. A young woman raised her hand. You say that people foolishly worship the photograph of someone who's already gone. You gave the example of George Washington or Gandhi. But can't the photo of a spiritual teacher be very helpful to teach others to love him? Prabhupada, yes, those who are spiritually advanced, they're not different from their photograph. Just like here is the statue of Krishna. He's not different from Krishna. The original person Krishna and the statue of Krishna are the same. Just like we're chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna and the name of Krishna are non-different. Do you realize it? If we're not getting some spiritual enlightenment by chanting Hare Krishna, then do you think we're simply wasting our time? No, we're not wasting our time. We're actually getting spiritual ecstasy because there's no difference. Similarly, A spiritually perfect person and his photograph is the same, because it is in the absolute stage. Is that clear? Govinda Dasi raised a hand. You said that after leaving this body, a person in Krishna consciousness goes to a higher planet? Prabhupada, no. If you make perfection of Krishna consciousness, then after leaving this body, you go directly to Krishna. But if you're not perfect, if you've simply executed a certain percentage only, then you'll get the chance of another human body. But one who has understood what is Krishna, how Krishna takes his birth, how Krishna acts, he doesn't get any more material birth. Then, where does he go? Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti. He comes to me. That means in the supreme abode of Krishna. Therefore, we should be very serious. Why should we wait for another birth, either in very pious family or rich family or in other planet? This human body can give you the highest perfection, but we have to be very serious and try for that perfection. But we are not serious. We are not very serious. Actually, human civilization means that people should be very serious to have perfection of this human body. That is perfect human civilization. That is missing at the present moment. Srila Prabhupada sat in silence for several minutes, not moving. No one in the audience made a sound. Finally, he reached over for his kartals and began loudly ringing them together and singing, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya. And the devotees joined him. Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya. It was Prabhupada's desire to see his disciples raise their Krishna consciousness to 100% in their present lifetime. They could do it too, because the chanting was absolutely potent. But if there was something they didn't understand, he would explain it. Govinda Dasi hadn't understood. She had thought that a devotee was meant to go to a higher planet, means like heavenly material planet. But now she understood, and he had told them to become serious. He knew they sometimes went to the donut shop, Haribol, and even smoked cigarettes after kirtans, and he tolerated it. But he let them know that he really wanted them to become completely serious. Unless they were completely serious, they might have to go to a higher planet within the material universe. And what good was that? To rise to a human birth took many lifetimes. Human life was meant for perfection, so they should be serious. But, he had said, we are not serious. After the kirtan, Srila Prabhupada left the storefront and returned to his apartment. Hayagriva, turning to Haridas, asked why no one had thrown the crazy boy out. In New York, Hayagriva said, Brahmananda would have removed him at the first outburst. You have to be careful with the hippies here, Haridas explained. Tactful is the word. In this neighborhood, if someone walks around high on LSD, people automatically assume that he is due all the respect of God and should be tolerated. They come in and jump up and down and scream, but we can't lay a hand on them because they are LSD saints. If we had touched that boy this morning, the whole neighborhood would be down on us. The diggers next door are pretty noisy. That it was a hippie shop selling all hippie paraphernalia and all sorts of things, like organic foods and stuff like that also. The diggers next door are pretty noisy, but they unplug their jukebox during lectures, and they've been very friendly, giving us clothing and helping us decorate the temple. Sometimes the Hell's Angels go over there and raise a lot of noise, and sometimes they even come in here. If they do, best to humor them. They're always trouble. That very morning, some Hell's Angels started a fight in the digger's store. The devotees could hear thuds and screams through the walls as a big black beat up 3 Hell's Angels. The brawl ended only after a police car and an ambulance arrived. Afterwards, about a dozen people drifted into the temple talking about the brawl. Harsharani put out extra plates for the guests. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay.